passion. This is all in for the love of the game. This is LoveSetMatch.
I mean, Andre Agassi had this quote, you don't have to be better than everyone else in the draw when you go out on the court. Like, you have to be better than someone that's across the net.
I think you got to stay active in a sport sense, go out there, do some sports. I think it always makes you feel better. Maybe you're more tired in the very moment, but actually the rest of the day feels better. And then I think giving back as well, making other people happy is going to give you a good feeling too.
Hi guys, welcome to Tennis Pal Chronicles, the podcast to feed your passion for all things tennis. I'm your host, Philip Kim, also known as Coach PK, the tennis pro for the Langham Huntington Hotel in sunny Southern California, and boy is it hot out here. And I'm also the executive director for the nonprofit LoveSetMatch. Tennis Pal Chronicles is sponsored by Tennis Pal, the best app to find people to play with. So visit tennispal.com to download the app today. It's available on Android and Apple, and it really is great. I use it every day to find people to play with, so check it out. I'm excited to share with you my interview with a tennis journalist from London as we recap the stunning Wimbledon results. Did you guys watch it? It was just incredible. But first, just a quick update with what's happening around here at LoveSetMatch. Well, Valerie is off to see Nick Kyrgios, Gael Monfils, Taylor Fritz, and Diego Schwartzman, among others, tonight at the Ultimate Tennis Showdown. It's happening this very minute at the Dignity Health Arena in Carson. And I'm so excited to recap that experience with her when she returns. That's going to be a fun podcast. Special shout out to the USTA for offering LoveSetMatch free tickets, which we were able to use as a fundraiser for our mission. And thank you so much, everyone who donated for that great fundraiser. And speaking of mission, we are in full summer swing of our free tennis classes offered to kids in East Los Angeles. Yep, they're absolutely free, and they're in partnership with LA County. We are hosting these classes at 3 different parks and reaching so many kids who would never have the experience of a tennis class or a tennis lesson from a tennis coach. But more importantly, we hope we're creating great memories for these kids to fall in love with the sport we are so passionate about ourselves. And through these relationships, offering encouragement, fitness advice, motivation to live a healthy lifestyle, and so much more. Just being a part of their community is really a blessing. There are a lot of pictures of these classes on my Instagram, PhilipKimPK. If you want to see the joy of these kids' faces, I will put a link in the show notes. Hey, and if you want to support our mission, support the mission of LoveSetMatch, you can donate in 2 ways. First, you can just Zelle us at email aces@lovesetmatch.net, N-E-T. Second, you can donate on our Facebook page directly, lovesetmatch.org. So it's Facebook.com/lovesetmatch.org. And please subscribe to our page to see all the great things that we're doing, including the free tennis classes, because we believe there should be free tennis for all. So thank you so much for your generous donation. Our guest today is giving us an inside look at Wimbledon and the epic 5-hour men's final. It seems only appropriate that we partner with a tennis passionista from the UK, doesn't it? Well, Martin Keaty writes about tennis, including tennis history, for Last Word on Tennis, or LWOT for the insiders for short. He is based in London, and his work can be found by searching either Martin Keaty, author, LWOT. On Twitter, you can find him at MRTNKEADY, or his website, theshakespeareplays.com. I think you're really going to love his insightful take on Carlos Alcaraz and Novak Djokovic. We had a great conversation, so please welcome Martin Keaty for the first time to the Tennis Pal Chronicles.
Djokovic is deposed. There's a new king of centre court, Carlos Alcaraz of Spain.
7-6, 6-1, 3-6, 6-4.
He's beaten the best of all time. He's beaten a man who is virtually invincible on this court. And just with all the great finals, you see the champion being embraced and embracing the people who made it possible for him. The door into the players' box. Juan Carlos Ferrero, another world number one. Many coaches and many people have played their part in the development of this young man. Father, brothers, uncles, his grandfather. In many ways, it takes a village to raise a boy, and this is a community effort. It's wonderful.
Hi, Martin. Thank you so much for joining me on Tennis Pal Chronicles. It's great to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here, Philip.
Thank you so much. And you are where in the world?
I'm in London. I write for Last Word on tennis.com, or LWOT, which is a global platform for tennis, the global sport. I'd say it's only second only to football, soccer, for being the sport with the greatest reach. So it makes sense there are writers throughout the world.
That's great. And apparently you have such a passion for tennis that you post on Twitter a lot, because that's how we met you. Andy, who runs our Twitter account, says that you are so great, and also share all of the posts and the writing that you do. And we really have appreciated your writing. Think that you're a great writer, obviously passionate about tennis. So let's just jump right into Wimbledon. I thought it was so appropriate to have somebody from England talk about Wimbledon for us on the podcast. What's your take on what happened this year?
Well, 4 or 5 days on from the magnificent men's final, which I'll concentrate on. Like everyone else, I feel terribly sorry for Ons Jabeur. She couldn't win the women's final, but equally Vondrousova was terrific. So on the men's final, as I wrote for LWOT, it has to be seen as the greatest debut or maiden or first win at Wimbledon of the Open era. It's that extraordinary an achievement. Unfortunately, it was that extraordinary a match. It was one of the great finals. That's not just recency bias by any objective. It was a great final, a true
It really was a thriller.
Well,
yes.
it was tennis, and it was a 5-act drama like a Shakespeare play. For something to be truly epic, there has to be time. And I know the great Billie Jean King, who, like everyone in tennis, I adore, but only Allah is perfect. She maintains that the men should come down to 3 sets. They only play 5 sets at the majors, and you see the difference in a truly epic final. The term epic means put simply, a story that takes place over time, and it was a great 5-act drama with all the turning points of a great play or a great story of any kind. So it was magnificent.
How did you feel after that first set when Djokovic was so dominant?
Well, probably as bad as Carlos Alcaraz himself. I mean, as he admitted afterwards. But what was extraordinary was, given what had happened in Paris less than a month ago, certainly very recently, where he'd had the full cramps and he admitted it was because of nerves, you thought, my goodness, you know, this is a continuation of Paris. He'd lost the last 3 sets, I think, cumulatively in Paris and Wimbledon for 2 games. And Novak was at his best, absolutely imperious. And the fear was that it was going to be a washout. But then Carlos Alcaraz does what Carlos Alcaraz does, which is he is the fastest learner I've ever seen in tennis, and I've seen a lot of the Open era. He learns so quickly. Of all his qualities, that's probably the defining one. They talk about fast twitch fibres. Well, he has supremely fast mental fibres because he adapted to grass so quickly. 4th tournament, 12 matches, Wimbledon champion against the man who was at least trying to equal being the greatest grass court player ever in Novak, trying to equal Roger Federer's record of 8 titles. So absolutely phenomenal.
And he even mentioned that, Novak, in his speech at the end, which I thought, I think a lot of people took wrong, but it was interesting that he mentioned that record. Obviously, he had it in his head that Roger has that record.
Well, Novak, of all the big three, himself, Federer and Nadal, by his own admission, is by far the most concerned with being, at least statistically, the GOAT. And he is statistically, objectively, he is the greatest male tennis player ever. By his own admission, he's greedy. He wants to be for want of a better term, the GOATog, the GOAT on grass, which Federer currently is on 8 titles. And
right.
And I thought what was even more interesting in what Novak said, and he was tremendously gracious and very, very he took defeat painfully, he cried, but he showed I thought he was incredibly magnanimous, and it was very admirable, his response to what would have been a painful defeat, what was a painful defeat. But the thing I took from it was that he said, and this is paraphrasing, and I hate to paraphrase, but he essentially said that he'd never faced a player like Alcaraz before, that both Federer and Nadal had their weaknesses, and he said it in such a way as to suggest that only he knew what those weaknesses were, which would make sense.
Right.
But he said, and again I'm paraphrasing, but he went on to say that Alcaraz has no weaknesses, which is obviously the other aspect, that great players, great coaches, great commentators, anyone who loves tennis, he is already potentially the most complete male tennis player we've ever seen. Potentially. He has to have the longevity of a great career like the big three to compete with them. But other than injury, and serious injury at that, which I obviously hope doesn't befall him or anyone, he has for example, he has a chance over time, certainly, to win the calendar slam, which up to now, and it probably won't happen now, none of the big three have achieved. Such is his dominance over everyone else other than Djokovic, that would be certainly plausible in the next few years.
Yeah, it was really quite stunning how mentally tough Carlos was to be able to come back in the second set and then to hold in the fifth set. I think really showed tremendous mental strength.
Absolutely. I mean, the mental aspect of tennis is often talked about, but it's absolutely there. It's probably one of those sports that you're not playing it more of the time because of the break between points. Not like a continuous team sport like basketball or football, for example. You are thinking more between points. So, and given what had happened in Paris, which itself was very shocking, precisely because he'd appeared so bulletproof mentally, it was difficult to understand why that had happened. But what was even more extraordinary about Paris, I think, Philip, was his reaction afterwards, where in the press conference afterwards, a few hours maximum afterwards, he was very open about it. He was almost smiling about it, in the sense that he said, I was nervous, I got it. It was his first time facing Novak at a major, with Novak going for and eventually winning the outright GOAT status, winning his 23rd major. But as I wrote before the tournament, and again, I'm sure there are lots of people who deep down would have predicted this, but he's such a fast learner. You saw it in his first, I think it was his first significant tour win in Rio in February of 22 last year. Essentially, he had to beat 3 top 10 players in about 24 hours because of rain delays. And he did, to win the tournament, and that was something that you thought, this is extraordinary. I wrote at the time that he seems to do impossible things, and this was one of the impossible things, to beat the great Novak Djokovic, who was going for his 8th Wimbledon title, in an all-time great final. And as you say, Philip, showing enormous mental strength to do so.
And even more maybe than Djokovic, because you really expected Novak to have the upper hand on mental strength. He's done it time and time again. He even, alluded to it in the Federer-Wimbledon match, and of course the U.S. Open match against Federer as well. But the 2 backhands heard around the world, if I may. Where he missed and hit into the net. I mean, his go-to shot, his golden shot backhand, couldn't believe that he couldn't deliver in that tiebreak.
Well, it is a testament to Novak that I think it's evident there for the next, hopefully, at least for the next year, 18 months, it will be largely Novak v Carlos Alcaraz at the majors, I think. They are the two truly great players. It's extraordinary, the age range between them. I don't think, I may stand to be corrected, but in the major professional sports, I don't think you've ever had that vast an age range of 16 years between the top 1 and 2 in the world. Novak is rightly praised for his mental strength. I mean, he wouldn't have won 23 majors without it. And
Right.
But equally, he is only human. It's the wonderful old expression about time heals all wounds, but it also wounds all heals. The very greatest athletes eventually will begin to decline. I mean, I'm not even necessarily saying he is declining yet, but Federer has retired. Nadal has said next year will be his final year, and even Novak can't go on forever. You saw that in Rome when Holger Rune beat him there, which was rather like Carlos Alcaraz last weekend at Wimbledon, the young Djokovic beating the older Djokovic. He is such a phenomenal physical specimen, such a great athlete, that I'm sure he can absolutely play. I'm sure he wants to win 25 titles at least to go past Margaret Court, so that he's the go on both men's and women's side of the draw. But it should be a thrilling... I mean, we've got the US Open to come. They're all surface players, so potentially, hopefully, if injury permits, we would see a succession of great finals over the next year, 18 months.
And of course, he's going to take this so seriously and improve his game and improve his matchup against Carlos. I think there was a feeling that, as you alluded to in the beginning, this is a real change, a real challenge to the dominance. And I think that's got to hurt for Novak, not only because of this one specific thing, but because he's always wanted to be dominant. Even though he is, as you said, objectively dominant, he's never really had the time to just be able to enjoy that luxury. He's always been fighting against Federer and Nadal. You thought that maybe this year he could do the calendar Grand Slam, he could take his victory lap, this would be it. But he was robbed, maybe.
Well, I suppose after all this time, and it stretches back really about a dozen years, you could call it domination. It's extraordinary what he's done. I mean, by almost every optic and every metric, he is statistically the greatest. And, he beat Federer 3 times on his favourite surface. He beat Nadal twice on his favourite surface. They don't have comparable records against him. As you say, he absolutely wanted to dominate, and he has done by any reasonable measure. I will pay tribute to a terrific British tennis writer, I hope I pronounce his name right, Tumaini Carroll of The Guardian, who wrote it could galvanise Djokovic, because in Alcaraz he now has a great rival of the calibre of Federer and Nadal, and that will, as it has in the past, force him to raise his game.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, and he's done that time and again in his own career.
Absolutely.
So there's no doubt that he's going to come back for it. And I think he even alluded to something like that in his match or the press conference, that he's looking forward to it, right?
He's looking forward to the US Open, I believe. He talked about that he was hoping again it would be, I would imagine they will be 1 and 2 seeds again, that they'll be seeded to meet in the final. At the moment, they certainly should be, because it was worth bearing in mind what they'd done to their semi-final and quarter-final opponents, both of them. They had clearly beaten them comfortably. I mean, Alcaraz's run, we were talking about the historic nature of it. What was extraordinary was he beats 3 generations of great players. He beats Holger Rune in the quarter-final, who is probably the second best player, young player after him. He beats Medvedev, a major champion, a truly great player, relatively easily by any measure, and then he beats the GOAT, the biggest champion of them all in the final. I mean, it is genuinely historic. It's wonderful.
And you've got to bring to light Alcaraz spirit. You never really felt like he was tired in the Wimbledon final, and he seemed to have more joy. By contrast, obviously, Djokovic was very frustrated, and then to have that outbreak with the racket and smashing the net post, and it was a kind of a contrast of energy, don't you think?
There was a contrast of energy, but obviously there was a huge contrast of energy at the end of the first set when Novak had effectively breadsticked him, as I believe the term is, 6-1, and obviously at that point Carlos Alcaraz was very flat. However, it's the word you use, joy, or any variation on that, joyful, joyousness. That is the quality that Alcaraz communicates when he plays, and that's very difficult and rare. I mean, it's extraordinary. It's sufficiently extraordinary to do anything as well as these great athletes do it. To be able to relax enough to positively enjoy it and then communicate that joy to others is remarkable. It's almost unprecedented. It's certainly very rare. And that seems to be the case with Carlos. He's very young. I'm a much older net head, and I would say that he seems a remarkably open character, which I gather, even from my own children, is a quality much more valued among younger generations than it may have been in the past. He's very open, as he was after Paris, after cramping, when he immediately admitted it was wrong, no prevarication, no excuse, it was wrong and I'll fix it. And he does communicate joy. The great story about him, which I'm sure you've heard, but it's worth retelling, was when it would have been his first Masters title when he won it in Miami last year. And as is the custom around the world, especially in Melbourne, the champion will dive in a nearby river or lake. But Carlos Alcaraz, when he won it, he insisted that all the ball kids, the ball boys and girls, some of whom were about his age, all jumped in with him. And it was a very natural, sharing, joyous reaction, and that was great.
Very community. Yes,
well, it's also
nice.
It's wonderful for tennis because it's had what I call the three gods of tennis, the big three. The gigantic three would be more accurate because no other sport has had the three best all-time players in one generation. Even the great boxers of the 70s, the heavyweights, Ali and Fraser would make the top 10. You might have three of the top 10. You don't have the top three as you do in tennis. It's that historically amazing, not just in tennis, but in all of sport. And in Carlos Alcaraz, it's the next generation. He is the perfect post-Big Three player. As Novak was suggesting, and as other people have written, I've certainly written, he seems to have the best element of each of the big three. He volleys like Federer, he baselines like Nadal, and he defends like Djokovic. It's an extraordinary combination.
Yeah, and his drop shots, right?
Oh, well, that's another story, because, of course, the drop shot only works because he has the power. It's the classic 1-2 punch where he blasts a player back behind the baseline with his great forehand or backhand. They're equally brilliant. And then he can execute the drop shot. I wrote today in another context that it is power and beauty, Nadal and Federer.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And you saw it time and again against Djokovic. He kept bringing him in and then passing him. It was the 1-2 punch, as you said. Very, very succinct, and I'm sure a big part of his plan. Was it 11 of 12 drop shots that he executed? It's incredible. I
must confess, as I said, being an older nethead, Philip, I'm more of a narrative than a numbers guy. I absolutely value numbers and know the use. I would probably struggle to remember the exact statistic. He certainly won the majority of them, probably the overwhelming majority.
Yeah, that was pretty impressive. And you saw Novak actually trying to come forward a lot more. Was it in the third set? And you felt like maybe he was trying to shorten the points, but it just wasn't working.
Well, I must confess, like many, many tennis fans around the world, 3 or 4 days on last night, I watched the highlights of the final again, and like the best stories, it was even better this time around. And it is worth saying that you measure the quality of a victory against who you have defeated, and in beating the GOAT, that's an extraordinary achievement. It really was absolutely historic. I mean, it was, but what was so important was it was tennis at its best, that they were bringing out the best of each other, that they were literally producing shots and extending each other in a way that no other players could at the moment. And that was why tennis in particular thrives on the great rivalries. Pete Sampras was such a great champion, no one could compete with him at Wimbledon especially, so he doesn't have you have Borg and McEnroe, Federer and Nadal, there's no Sampras because he was so good. You need rivalry, yeah. And hopefully in Djokovic, Alcaraz, it will inevitably be short-lived, but then again, I'm sure I read somewhere recently that Novak was talking about playing till he was 50, and if anyone could, he could. He's probably thinking, 25, I want to win 50. That insatiable desire is the definition of a champion, the multiple champions, he's in the absolute elite of sport with the Jordans, the Pelés, the Bradmans, because he's won so much over such a long period.
Yeah, and had to overcome some, truly gods of tennis, as you said.
Well, his fellow deities in Federer and Nadal. And it is always worth saying, and this was, I'm sure it was pointed out by others, but this was pointed out by Russell Fuller of the BBC, that Djokovic inevitably suffered because he came along slightly after Federer and Nadal, and they were so great that most people had picked you're either Federer or Nadal. There weren't that many people left for Djokovic. There were later, as those two great champions, especially Federer, began to decline. And he is probably more popular among younger tennis fans than older tennis fans. But Novak, I mean, it's one of the great stories. It's a great human story. The child who escapes war, who has to go across Europe on his own because his parents can't travel with him, and becomes the greatest of all time. That human story always needs to be borne in mind with Novak Djokovic. I personally do not like his stance on vaccination, to say the least, but purely in sporting terms, he's one of the greatest champions there's ever been.
Yeah, and you have to say that because of his stance on vaccination, he might have been 2 titles heavier. Right?
Absolutely. And it's certainly, I mean, you, again, as many people have said, you can admire the principle. Most people, whatever their view, would have thought, well, I want to play at these tournaments. As he said, his principle on this issue, at least, is such that he has foregone those opportunities, but that's his choice. As I say, I personally do not like his stance on it, and I don't like the fact he became a poster boy for it. Unfortunately, he was the most famous anti-vaxxer, and that will always stay with him. However, he's a truly great champion. His is a truly great story. And as I say, I'm really looking forward to hopefully this great Wimbledon final being the first instalment of at least a few truly great finals. The US Open should be spectacular.
Yes, something to look forward to for sure. Martin, thank you so much for joining us today. It's just been a pleasure having your insight, and look forward to a lot more times where we can get together on Tennis Pal Chronicles and talk about tennis. It's great to have you from London talking about what we are. Where are you exactly? Are you in London?
I am in London. It's Balham, which is just south of Clapham Common. That's the easiest way to express it.
Great. And where do people find your articles? Where do they go?
I write for lastwordontennis.com, as I said, or LWOT for short. If you just search for LWOT, equally you can just put my name, Martin Keedy, author. LWOT will take you to my articles. Great. And on Twitter, we got to have them follow you. I'm on Twitter. I have not the easiest handle because a long story, Martin is a very common name. On Twitter it is it's all lowercase to be exact. It's Martin without the I's. MRTN Keedy at MRTN Keedy. It's hard to come along later and try to get a great name, isn't it? Well, one that you can easily pronounce or spell or remember would be good. Very nice. Well, thank you so much, Martin. I know you need to rush off, but we're so honored to have you on the podcast and look forward to talking to you again. Well, it's been a great pleasure, Philip. Thank you very much for having me, and I do hope we can talk again in the future.
Great. Thank you.
Bye.